This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Read and recorded by Deborah Lynn in Northern Michigan, February 2007. Wanted, a Cook by Alan Dale. There was a ring at the front doorbell. Letitia, wrought up, nervously clutched my arm. For a moment a sort of paralysis seized me. Then, alertly as a young calf, I bounded toward the door, hope aroused, and expectation keen. It was rather dark in the outside hall, and I could not quite perceive the nature of our visitor, but I soon gladly realized that it was something feminine, and as I held the door open, a thin, small, soiled wisp of a woman glided in and smiled at me. "Talar ni svensk?" she asked, but I had no idea what she meant. She may have been impertinent, or even rude, or perhaps improper, but she looked as though she might be a domestic, and I led her gently, reverently, to Letitia in the drawing room. I smiled back at her in a wild endeavor to be sympathetic. I would have anointed her, or bathed her feet, or plied her with figs and dates, or have done anything that any nationality craves as a welcome. As the front door closed, I heaved a sigh of relief. Here was probably the quintessence of 5 advertisements. Out of the mountain crept a mouse, and quite a little mouse, too. "Talar ni svensk?" proved to be nothing more outrageous than "Do you speak Swedish?" My astute little wife discovered this intuitively. I left them together, my mental excuse being that women understand each other, and that a man is unnecessary under the circumstances. I had some misgivings on the subject of Letitia and svensk, but the universal language of femininity is not without its uses. I devoutly hoped that Letitia would be able to come to terms, as the mere idea of a cook who couldn't excoriate us in English was, at that moment, delightful. At the end of a quarter of an hour I strolled back to the drawing room. Letitia was smiling, and the handmaiden sat grim and uninspired. "I've engaged her, Archie," said Letitia. "She knows nothing, as she has told me, in the few words of English that she has picked up. But you remember what Aunt Julia said about a clean slate." I gazed at the maiden, and reflected that while the term slate might be perfectly correct, the adjective seemed a bit over enthusiastic. She was decidedly soiled, this quintessence of a quintet of advertisements. I said nothing, anxious not to dampen Letitia's elation. "She has no references," continued my wife, "as she has never been out before. She is just a simple little Stockholm girl. I like her face immensely, Archie, immensely. She is willing to begin at once, which shows that she is eager, and consequently likely to suit us. Wait for me, Archie, while I take her to the kitchen. Come, Gerda." Exactly why Letitia couldn't say "Come, Gerda," seemed strange. She probably thought that "calm" must be Swedish, and that it sounded well. She certainly invented "calm" on the spur of the Scandinavian moment, and I learned afterward that it was correct. My inspired Letitia! Still, in spite of all, my opinion is that "Come, Gerda" would have done just as well. "Isn't it delightful?" cried Letitia, when she joined me later. "I am really enthusiastic at the idea of a Swedish girl. I adore Scandinavia, Archie. It always makes me think of Ibsen. Perhaps Gerda Lyberg, that's her name, will be as interesting as Hedda Gabler and Mrs. Alving and Nora and all those lovely complex Ibsen creatures." "They were Norwegians, dear," I said gently, anxious not to shatter illusions. "The Ibsen play deals with Christiania, not with Stockholm." "But they are so near," declared Letitia, amiable and seraphic once more. "Somehow or other I invariably mix up Norway and Sweden and Denmark. I know I shall always look upon Gerda as an Ibsen girl who has come here to live her life, or work out her inheritance. Perhaps, dear, she has some interesting internal disease, or a maggoty brain. Don't you think, Archie, that the Ibsen inheritances are always most fascinating? A bit morbid, but surely fascinating." I prefer a healthy cook, Letitia, I said meditatively. Somebody willing to interest herself in our inheritance rather than in her own. I don't mind what you say now, she pouted. I am not to be put down by clamor. We really have a cook at last, and I feel more lenient toward you, Archie. Of course, I was only joking when I suggested the Ibsen diseases. Gerda Lyberg may have inherited from her ancestors something quite nice and attractive. Then you mustn't look upon her as Ibsen, Letitia, I protested. The Ibsen people never inherit nice things. Their ancestors always bequeath nasty ones. That is where their consistency comes in. They are receptacles for horrors. Personally, if you'll excuse my flippancy, I prefer Norwegian anchovies to Norwegian heroines. It is a mere matter of opinion. I'm ashamed of you, retorted Letitia defiantly. You talk like some of the wretchedly frivolous criticisms, so-called, that men like Acton Davies and Alan Dale inflict upon the long-suffering public. They never amuse me. Ibsen may make his heroines the recipients of ugly legacies, but he has never yet cursed them with the odious incubus known as a sense of humor. The people with a sense of humor have something in their brains worse than maggots. We'll drop the subject, Archie. I'm going to learn Swedish. Before Gerda Lyberg has been with us a month, I intend to be able to talk fluently. It will be most useful. Next time we go to Europe, we'll take in Sweden, and I'll do the piloting. I am going to buy some Swedish books and study. Won't it be jolly? And just think how melancholy we were this morning, you and I, looking out of that window and trying to materialize cooks. Wasn't it funny, Archie? What amusing experiences we shall be able to chronicle later on. Letitia babbled on like half a dozen brooks, and thinking up a gentle parody in the shape of cooks may come and men may go, I decided to leave my household gods for the bread-earning contest downtown. I could not feel quite as sanguine as Letitia, who seemed to have forgotten the dismal results of the advertisement. Just one little puny Swedish result. I should have preferred to make a choice. Letitia was as pleased with Gerda Lyberg as though she had been a selection instead of a that or nothing. If somebody had dramatized Gerda Lyberg's initial dinner, it would probably have been considered exceedingly droll. As a serious episode, however, its humor, to my mind, lacked spontaneity. Letitia had asked her to cook us a little Swedish meal, so that we could get some idea of Stockholm life, in which, for some reason or other, we were supposed to be deeply interested. Unfortunately, I was extremely hungry, and had carefully avoided luncheon in order to give my appetite a chance. We sat down to a huge bowl of cold, greasy soup, in which enormous lumps of meat swam, as though for their life, awaiting rescue at the prongs of a fork. In addition to this Epicurean dish was a teeming plate of water-soaked potatoes, delicately boiled. That was all. Letitia said that it was Swedish, and the most annoying part of the entertainment was that I was alone in my critical disapprobation. Letitia was so engrossed with the little Swedish conversation book that she brought to table that she forgot the more material question of food, forgot everything but the horrible jargon she was studying and the soiled, wisp-like maiden who looked more unlike a clean slate than ever. "What shall I say to her, Archie?" asked Letitia, turning over the pages of her book as I tried to rescue a block of meat from the cold fat in which it lurked. "Here is a chapter on dinner. I am very hungry. Jag mycket hungrig. Rather pretty, isn't it? Hark at this. Kai Per gif mig mat said Ellen och vinlist an. That means, waiter, give me the bill of fare and the list of wines. Don't, I cried, don't. This woman doesn't know what dining means. Look out a chapter on feeding. Letitia was perfectly unruffled. She paid no attention to me whatsoever. She was fascinated with the slovenly girl who stood around and gaped at her Swedish. Gerda, said Letitia with her eyes on the book, "Gif mir apvens en napak negra potater." And then, as Miss Lyberg dived for the drowned potatoes, Letitia exclaimed in an ecstasy of joy, "She understands, Archie, she understands.